Well, to understand what's happening in the region since October 7 of last year, I think a couple of things need to be kept in mind. First, this war, 10 months plus right now, is unique in the history of Israel in the sense that it has a very clear existential dimension. For the first time, there are existential fears and dangers in Israel that have been brought to the surface by this particular war, unlike all the previous ones. And this is important to keep in mind because I think, the popular narrative is that it's pretty much the fault of Prime Minister Netanyahu, who for personal and political reasons has been the obstacle to stop the war and so on. I think the reality is deeper than that. There may be an element of that in it, but frankly, what we're dealing with here from an Israeli perspective is an existential threat, what's been called a ring of fire that Iran, the Islamic Republic, has set up very meticulously and painstakingly around Israel over the past at least 2 decades. And the situation in Gaza clearly revealed that the degree of entrenchment and support in terms of weapons and training and so on by Iran for Hamas has been phenomenal. And so that's one important dimension to keep in mind, the existential dimension. Israel has to win this war. They need to eliminate Hamas as a threat, and they can't stop short of that. So it's not really an issue of one person kind of obstructing any progress towards a deal. The other important feature of this war comes from Iran itself. To put it very bluntly, this is an example, an open example of Iranian imperialism. Iran is a regional power with expansionist aims, and Iran has many armed and trained proxies around the region. Perhaps the jewel in the crown of these proxies would be Hezbollah here in Lebanon. And the interesting thing about Iranian expansion is that Khomeini, the Ayatollah Khomeini, back in 1979, cleverly said that whoever holds the Palestine card eventually wins in the region. And since then, Iran has been working hard to garner and monopolize control of the so-called Palestine card, and has largely succeeded in wrenching it away from the Sunni world. That's one thing. But the other interesting thing, which reveals the cynicism of the Iranian regime, is that in Shiite theology, there is hardly any reference or any emphasis put on Jerusalem or the Holy Land, unlike with Sunni Islam. The Aqsa and all of that, these are not Shiite areas of devotion, never have been. In fact, the only apocryphal story is that the head of Hussein, who is revered by Shiism, was on its way to be buried in Egypt and spent some weeks in Ashkelon. And that's even an apocryphal story because there are other stories, at least 2 others, about the head of Hussein being buried, one about his head being buried in Najaf in Iraq, and another one, I forget exactly where. But so that's really the extent of it. So Shiism doesn't have any kind of theological or religious connection with Jerusalem and the Holy Land the same way Sunni Islam does. So that simply shows that what the regime has been doing is using Palestine as an entry point to flex its muscles in the region and to dominate. So I think these two, the existential dimension for Israel and the imperial and even cynical dimension for Iran are very important. Now, coming to a place like Lebanon, Hezbollah, as I said, is Iran's most important proxy asset. And they have entrenched themselves in Lebanon over the years, rendering whatever semblance there is of a Lebanese government pretty much irrelevant. In fact, I can say that Lebanon has experienced in 2019 a massive, unprecedented economic and social collapse. And that came as a result of the corrupt mafia ruling class perpetrating a unique Ponzi scheme on the entire country and robbing the banks and people's savings, and that the armed militia in the country, namely Hezbollah, have been protecting them. So we essentially have in Lebanon, and have had for many years, a mafia militia cartel, the corrupt ruling class protected by the armed militia, the proxies of Iran. And also, Hezbollah has systematically plunged the country into political and economic paralysis. No attempt at any economic reforms. Contrary to all of the repeated requests by the IMF, the World Bank, Lebanon's European friends, the United States, and so on. Number one. Number two, no presidential elections. Lebanon is now quite overdue, more than a year overdue, in terms of its presidential elections, and that's on hold. No reforms. The complete paralysis of the judiciary system. So nothing is working in the country, and there is this so-called caretaker government, because the government has also resigned and has not been replaced. And it is both a combination of being completely impotent on the one hand, or being sycophantic and completely beholden to the whims and dictates of Hezbollah. So there is a huge vacuum, a political vacuum. There's an economic collapse that's deepening by the day, by the week, by the month. The Lebanese people have been defrauded of their savings. So Lebanon is in very, very bad shape. And add to all of this, Hezbollah has actually carved out a little statelet, a kind of mini state within a state in Lebanon, in parts of Lebanon. Certainly South Lebanon, the southern suburbs of Beirut, and parts of the Bekaa Valley. All of these constitute a kind of state within a state run by Hezbollah. And when I say a statelet or a state within a state, I mean literally an enclave that has its own economy, its own ATM machines, its own sources of revenue coming mainly from Iran, cash from Iran, but also from drug trafficking and other illicit activities in which Hezbollah engage. And then this statelet actually has its own foreign policy, declares war, is ready to make peace, quote unquote, and all while completely and totally ignoring the will of the Lebanese people or the interests of Lebanon. And so this, in fact, is the situation as it is on the ground. Add to this that they've become so brazen that they are ready at the tip of a hat to accuse anyone who disagrees with them as being a traitor, as being a lackey of the Zionists, and so on, all of these terms, when in fact they shouted from the rooftops that they are completely beholden and in the service of Wilayat al-Faqih, which means that they are under the orders of the supreme leader in Iran, Khamenei. So this is a very, very strange but also tragic situation for Lebanon and its people. Iran is an alien force, a completely alien culture, very different language. The vast majority of Lebanese have nothing to do with that culture and with those particular aspirations and that kind of religious apocalypticism, which is a version of radical Shiite Islam. And when I say the majority, I mean easily 70% of the Lebanese. Most of the Christians, a large majority, definitely, of the Sunnis, the Druze population, and many among the Shiites who remain still free and who, might be able to be courageous enough to express their dissenting views. Taken together, all of these are pretty much the majority of the Lebanese people. They don't want this war that's been imposed on them. They don't want an enlargement of it further from the south, further north towards Beirut and towards the other parts of Lebanon. The Lebanese people are not in the business of, quote unquote, liberating Jerusalem or, quote, restoring, unquote, Palestinian rights. The Lebanese tend to be sympathetic to just causes, but they refuse to be the exclusive spearhead of any such activity on the ground to bring about change through violence and through military means, especially when they have not been consulted. So the problem with Hezbollah is that they don't give a hoot about Lebanon's interests. They don't care about Lebanon and the Lebanese people at all. They have a different agenda and different priorities, and they are brazen enough to make that very clear. And on top of that, the level of impudence has reached the point where they are ready at the drop of a hat to accuse others of being traitors, when in fact the only traitors really are the minions and proxies of Iran in Lebanon. So in a nutshell, that's kind of the story as seen from the vantage point of Lebanon. I can also say that lately there have been mounting verbal attacks, also of an extremely rude nature, I would say, directed against the Christians of Lebanon. And this is mostly by journalists, so-called, who are actually the mouthpieces of Hezbollah and of Iran in Lebanon. One such person said recently, Lebanon has never had a cause and never stood for anything. Now, finally, Lebanon has a cause. Of course, he is neglecting the glaring fact that Lebanon has always had a very unique cause in the region, and that is the cause of freedom and man, both of which, freedom and the human person, are very beleaguered and scarce commodities in this Middle East. And if they have thrived, if the human person has thrived and has been free, it has been largely thanks to the Lebanese experiment here. Lebanon during the good times, because Lebanon's history, of course, is a checkered history. You've got the good and the bad side by side, but the good times have shown that we have a struggling Christian community led by the Maronites, who over centuries and at a great cost in terms of both resources and blood, have managed to retain a certain degree of personal and communal freedoms that that were lost pretty much by other native Christian communities in the region, who succumbed at one point or another to second-class or dhimmi status under Islamic rule. And so that is the cause of Lebanon. And I think, and many others agree with me, this is an extremely worthy cause, the cause of freedom and the cause of the human person. in Lebanon, 50% of humanity is not, namely the women, is not relegated to second-class, inferior, subordinate status, as it is in other countries in the region. On the contrary, women are celebrated, and their rights are very much preserved and upheld. Lebanon could do more, of course, for women in this regard, but it is way ahead than other societies. And that all comes back to the idea that freedom, a very scarce commodity in the region, has managed to survive and last, and in fact, at times, prosper in a place like Lebanon. So this is what's at stake in Lebanon. Another one of these mouthpieces of Hezbollah and Iran recently said, you people, addressing the Christians, you've become a very, very small minority, and therefore you have no right to open your mouths. We will take over, and we will be the ones who will run the country, and so on. This is, to put it very simply, this is a form of barbarism, because it interprets, pluralist interaction among groups purely in terms of numerical domination. Whoever becomes a numerical majority has the automatic green light to lord it over and even to persecute the others. This has nothing to do with democracy. This has nothing to do with healthy pluralism at all. And so these people are, as I said, there's a certain barbaric element here that is very foreign to Lebanon, because Lebanon has always maintained that all groups, regardless of their demographic, swelling or shrinkage, have rights both as individual citizens, but also as distinct groups. And the unit of the group forming Lebanon's pluralism is, of course, the religious sect. I mean, this is the given. I didn't create this. And so if these voices for majoritarian oppression and totalitarian persecution based purely on numbers are going to continue and to become dominant, the only answer for a place like Lebanon would be some form of creative federalism. Federalism among the various religious sects. And a truly federal formula, in fact, will preserve the rights of individuals and the groups to which they belong, regardless of the ups and downs of demographic numbers. So, in a nutshell, these are the issues that have been raised by this war. We're certainly still not out of the woods. There's no telling whether this war will expand further from where it is now in the south. The way things are looking, it seems at the moment that Iran and Hezbollah, despite all of the bluster that have come out from their leaders and so on, about retaliation and escalation and so on, it seems that they are, at least for now, somewhat deterred. And I think the reason for this deterrence is essentially a number of things. First of all, the massive military buildup by the United States and the messages the United States has been sending that the US doesn't want a war, and that anyone who actually goes for escalation is going to have to face the might of the United States. That's one. The other one is Israel's own threats, that this time, if Iran attacks, it'll not be like last April. There will be no waiting, and there will be no small retaliation. It will be swift, almost instantaneous, and massive. And the Iranians fear that this could include the targeting of their nuclear program. So So for now, it seems that neither Hezbollah nor Iran want an escalation. But the problem, as all the military experts tell us, is that things can get out of hand very quickly because of a mistake here or an error there or a miscalculation somewhere. That is really the danger, and it's keeping everybody on edge, and nerves are frayed, and we don't know what the future holds. But many in Lebanon are determined, A, to remain in the country, B, to ride this one out, and C, to make it very clear to Hezbollah that they are not on board. They are not on board with all of that Iran and its proxies are doing, and especially in Lebanon, where the interests of the country and the people have been cast aside in favor of an alien expansionist agenda by a foreign power. Many Lebanese will tell you openly that the number one enemy of Lebanon today is Iran and its local proxies, and not Israel. They'll tell you that Lebanon had no business, or Hezbollah specifically, had no business poking this hornet's nest on October 8th with the ridiculous pretext that they are supporting Gaza. Gaza has benefited zero from what Hezbollah has been doing, and Lebanon has been paying the price. So I'll just leave it at that at this point and see where we go from here. Thank you.